You must never enter this village. This happened when I was in elementary school, so it's been 20 years ago. My husband grew up in Siki village in the North Kanto region, surrounded by rice fields and mountains. When I was a child, I would pile up bundles of straw in the rice fields to make secret bases or catch fish in the river and play. The villages were all nice, and it had the charm of the countryside. It was a typical rural village, but there was one time when the whole village was plunged into fear. Today, I'd like to write about that incident. In this village, there is a crossroads that you must never enter. Although it is called a crossroads, it is a small hill-like area, about 3 meters wide, 10 meters deep, and 1 meter high. It was the size of a square. At the intersection, there was a small stone monument and something like a bush. It was surrounded by rice fields. I don't know why, but my parents and grandmother always told me not to play there. Apparently, there was a legend that if you touch it, it will rain blood. It was certainly a place with an eerie atmosphere, even for a child like me. It was a cold day in February. My friend and I decided to fly a kite. It's always windy in this area in winter, so it was perfect for flying a kite. We flew in a nearby rice field, as we always did. It's pretty easy to get into the swing of things. I wound the line on the reel of my fishing rod and attached the kite to it, but the kite kept climbing up. It was amazing. It had gotten so small. I was so happy that I loosened the reel and sent the kite flying higher and higher. However, the wind was too strong that day. With a pop sound, the kite spun around and flew off into the distance. Oh dear. I ran off with my friend Kachin to look for the kite, and soon I heard Kachin's voice going ahead. There it was. I was relieved to have been found, but my feelings quickly turned to anxiety. What should I do? What should I do? The kite was caught in the vegetation at Spirit Crossroads. It was flapping about in the wind. I had passed by here before, but never climbed up. My parents had told me never to go in, and the same was true for Kachin's family. The sun was still high. I thought about it for a while, but Kachin suggested that we find a long stick and try to hook it. I thought that was a great idea, so we immediately started to look for the stick. The stick they were looking for was found surprisingly quickly, and Kachin said he would do it and extended it towards the kite from a little distance away. The height from Shigekatsu to the kite was just under 3 meters. They poked at it several times, but it didn't look like they could get it at all. Kachin got annoyed and threw a stone at it. It hit the bell, and the rusty bell made a loud sound that was unimaginable from its appearance. But it's hard to get it. Just then, the kite came off Shigekatsu and flew high into the sky. It was with such force that even a child like me could tell right away that it was a waste of time, so I was frustrated. We decided to give up and go home together, but the weather suddenly got worse and it started to rain. Luckily, my house and Kachin's place were close by, so we said goodbye and got home right away. Then, at almost the same time, there was heavy rain and thunder. I thought, wow, thunder in February. But I was a little worried that it couldn't be because of what happened earlier. I woke up because there was some kind of commotion outside. What's this? I looked at the clock and it was 12:30 a.m. My parents were already awake and outside, asking the neighbors what was going on. When my father came back, he changed his clothes and said, "Kachin's gone missing." I was shocked. The reason for the commotion was that everyone in the village was looking for him. Apparently, he'd gone out to play during the day and never came back. But my father had been working the night shift and came home late, so he didn't notice. By the way, Kachin's mother has passed away. Do you know anything about him? He asked me that, but I was scared and kept quiet. In the end, we couldn't find Kachin that night. I definitely saw him running in the direction of his house. Where on earth did he go? The next day, the police and villagers started searching for him. As a child, I was scared and worried about what to do, but I felt like Kachin would really disappear if I continued like this. So I told my parents the truth. What an idiot. I was blown away by my father's slap. He always told me not to go in there, but all I could do was cry and apologize. My father immediately told the villagers about this and started discussing it. After a while, an old woman with mysterious powers, who was like the villagers' opinion leader, came and told us to wrap stamens around the house and put salt at the entrance. I have seen this old woman's mysterious powers several times before, and I remember when I was little, I had a bad case of intuition, so the old woman fixed it for me. She wrapped a thin string around my wrist and rubbed it, and then an unidentified creature that started to wiggle came out from between my fingernails and fingers. The old woman said that this was the intuition bug and pulled the wiggle. Even as a child, I thought she was a strange old woman. She looked just like the old woman from the prophecy who appeared soon after. This has become a big problem. I hope no one dies. The old woman told all the villagers to go home immediately and not to take even one step outside today. We must not touch that crossroads. Since ancient times, whenever someone tries to destroy it, someone has died. That's why a terrible curse will occur. The old woman threatened me. All I could do was cry and tremble. You're the next one to be killed. I'm going to keep my eyes closed tonight. No matter what happens, I must not open my eyes. Grandma said that and started chanting prayers at the Buddhist altar, pulling out some of my gods. I was surrounded by my parents and kept my eyes closed. It was getting late. I wondered if it would be easier if I went to sleep. I was so nervous, I couldn't sleep at all. Grandma kept chanting the name of the person. Then there was a snap, and the lights went out. My dad turned on the breaker, but the lights didn't come on. It must have been a power outage. I had no choice but to light a candle for the Buddhist altar. When I tried to hold it out, the old lady said "Gan" and stopped chanting. Clang Gan. I heard the sound of a golden root from afar. It's coming. The old lady said that and started to rustle and fiddle with something. I had my eyes closed, so I didn't know what was going on. But I felt like the golden root was getting closer and closer. Gah, gah. I was holding my parents' hands tightly, but I was sweating. My parents were also shivering. Granny was still rustling. I felt like a gold leaf had stopped in front of the roof. I had my eyes closed for so long that my hearing had become more sensitive. Then the front door started rattling. My parents and I were so scared that we screamed. The front door continued rattling for a while, but then it stopped. Then we heard the sound of something walking on the roof. We'd heard an eerie voice that sounded like it was coming from time to time. There were definitely multiple voices. But you can't make a sound with your eyes closed, the old lady said, and then she nailed something to the central pillar of the house. I felt something nearby. My parents didn't seem to notice, but I shouldn't make a sound. It felt like something was sniffing me nearby. It was disgusting, but it didn't seem like something from this world. My parents didn't seem to notice. I was on the verge of passing out from fear and tension. I was sure, and at the same time, I completely lost consciousness. In the morning, I often woke up to a commotion outside. I was found. Many people were screaming like that. I looked inside the room, but my parents were not there. Neither was my grandmother. I remembered Sakuya and got scared again. I turned my gaze to the center of the room, and something felt a bit off. It was the place where Grandma Sakuya had been doing something. Looking more closely, I saw that the central pillar, the main pillar, was burnt black. What on earth had happened? Then my mother, who was outside, came into the house and said she had found Kachin, who had gone there. I immediately jumped up and went outside. Just then my father came home, and I heard a lot of things. Apparently, Kachin had been sleeping naked in a nearby pig pen for some reason. His life was in good health, but he had no memory of anything since he bought and sold me. He said he had some burns on his hands. As for me, I heard that just after I left last night, a pillar had broken and the gold roots had disappeared, and I was able to see the morning safely. The old woman put my god into a cylinder doll and nailed it to the pillar, which caused the house to collapse. The old woman said that the main pillar of the house, the guardian deity, took his place and saved Kachin, and that she was there to purify his body. Apparently, it was Kachin who had been rattling the front door and rampaging on the roof yesterday. He must have been possessed. After that, Kachin was taken to the hospital in town, but he returned home feeling better, and his memory was gone. Through this incident, even as a child, I was deeply reminded that there are places in nature where you should not stand. Time has passed, and now, a highway interchange has been built around that intersection. The highway was the Kita-Kanto Expressway. I left the countryside a few years ago, but even now, when I see traffic restrictions, I remember that time. My parents told me that the highway route was deliberately designed to bypass that intersection. It's true that if that intersection had been destroyed during construction, what would have happened to the construction plan for this highway? It's scary to think about it. From this experience, I learned that certain places in nature hold ancient powers and should be respected. The old woman's actions and the village's reaction left a lasting impression on me. It made me realize that there are things beyond our understanding, and sometimes it's best to heed the warnings passed down through generations. As I grew older, I carried this lesson with me, always cautious of places with eerie atmospheres or strange histories. Years later, I moved away from the countryside to the city, where the pace of life was much faster, and the old legends of my village seemed like distant memories. However, every now and then, something would remind me of that night. A sudden thunderstorm, the sound of a bell, or the sight of a kite soaring high in the sky. Each reminder would bring back the fear and awe I felt as a child, reinforcing the lesson I had learned. Some places are best left undisturbed. As I reflect on my childhood and the incident at the Spirit Crossroads, I feel a mix of gratitude and respect for the old woman and the traditions of my village. Her wisdom and the collective knowledge of the villagers had kept us safe for generations. Even now, as I navigate the complexities of modern life, I carry a piece of that ancient wisdom with me, always mindful of the unseen forces that might be at play in the world around us. Lonely. I feel lonely, and about 3 years ago, I experienced a story. The contract for the apartment I was living in at the time expired at the end of March, so I thought it would be better to buy it than to pay rent in this economic climate. I looked at about 10 properties, including used new buildings, and finally found a property that I wanted to live in, but it wouldn't be completed until the end of September. So, what should I do for the next 6 months? It's an expensive purchase, and it's difficult to find a property I like, so it's a shame. But I renewed my apartment and moved there in 6 months. I was planning to move, so I thought maybe I could talk to a real estate agent who buys apartments and get advice on that. The agency specialized in new builds, but buying a new one meant buying a second-hand one. So I asked a real estate agent I knew, who specializes in second-hand ones, to help me find a cheap property to live in for 6 months. I ended up getting a call from the real estate agent, who said it was a 1DK apartment that was 18 minutes on foot from the station and was scheduled to be demolished within the year, and people were moving out. If I was okay with the apartment, I would be happy with no deposit or tax and 10,000 yen rent. I immediately decided on it because the rent for the apartment I was living in at the time was 110,000 yen. Before I bought the apartment, I had 100,000 yen a month to spare, which was a great help. I moved there at the end of March. There were 7 apartments lined up side by side on the first floor, and it was a 4-story building with no elevator and 2 staircases on both sides. My room was in the middle of the 3rd floor. It was a demolished building, so the exterior was not exactly nice, and the interior hadn't been cleaned, so it felt a bit cramped. But I thought at the time that 10,000 yen for 6 months would be enough. After I started living there, I realized that people were moving out, so it's only natural, but there were not many residents, and when I came home late at night, there were only a few houses with the lights on. But they were moving out at the same time, so the lights were decreasing, but the nights were lonely. I went out drinking in the middle of April and returned home after 1 a.m. When I went up the stairs to the small landing on the 3rd floor, there was a person there. It was the middle of the night, so to be honest, I was scared. There was a young woman there too. She was also surprised. I apologized for surprising her and told her I was a resident. It turned out that she also lived in the same association. As we walked down the hallway together, we talked about how we had recently moved, and soon she said, "I'm not going to be here in the back, so I'm going to sleep." We said goodbye that day. She wasn't young, but she was pretty beautiful, so I got a little excited since I didn't have a girlfriend. I went out drinking 2 or 3 days a week and came back in the morning, and I often met this woman. At first, we just talked, but she would often talk to me, and since I had been drinking too, we ended up having a casual conversation. We just said goodnight in front of my house, but it didn't go any further than that. Then, when summer came around, there was a meeting of sorts for tenants of the apartment I was buying. I met a real estate agent there and asked her to introduce me to her. I thanked him for the favor, and the real estate agent said, "That's great, Marumaru-san. You'll have the whole floor to yourself, so it'll be quiet, right?" Yes. No. There are people living there who are in the same association. Baba-san, who introduced me to the property, said that no one lives there, but was she mistaken? Well, normally, that's right. Was she mistaken? I would have just dismissed it, but it really bothered me, and I felt a sense of unease in the pit of my stomach. So I asked the real estate agent to call and confirm, and it turns out that no one lives there after all. I had the phone handed over to me. I met the woman who said she lives there at the same meeting, but it wasn't just once or twice, and we've talked. I wonder if she's an illegal resident. The lighting is unusual, but she's still a customer. If there's something wrong, can you tell me? I can't call you today. Will you return to the apartment? Yes. I'll come back after the briefing. I'll talk to you then. On my way home, I thought about a lot of things. What is an illegal resident? A ghost? A stalker? Then I realized. My room is in the middle. If you are renting a room further back than your own, it might be better to use the opposite staircase instead of the one you are renting. I could understand it if you did it once or twice, but there is no need to go out of your way to use the farther staircase. A real estate agent came to my house in the evening. She was about 160 centimeters tall, slim, with shoulder-length hair, and was just over 30. Yes, that's what she looked like. So who was she? Unkako. More than 5 years ago, A couple who lived 2 rooms away from here jumped to their deaths because the man was cheating on her. Apparently, it was a shock to her, as she was also considering marriage. After that, people who used to live on this floor, and people from the apartment building opposite, would often see a woman standing on this floor in the middle of the night. I haven't heard much about it recently, so maybe she came out because she felt lonely now that there are fewer people around. It's not a very pleasant story, is it? The real estate agent said, "We still have a spare room, so we've brought you the key to the room on the 2nd floor today. Please live there from today. We'll help you carry your belongings." I was grateful for the offer and decided to keep the room. It wasn't that scary, and I was planning to move in about 2 months. So I thought at the time. But when I remembered to go out, I would put my hands together, and when I went to the convenience store, I would buy some small snacks and leave them in the hallway as a precaution. Then one day in the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud knock on the door and went to the entrance, where I heard a woman's voice muttering something just loud enough for me to hear. I got as far away from the door as possible and put a blanket over myself so that the voice wouldn't be heard, but I couldn't sleep. So when it got light in the morning, I opened the door, but there was no one there. To be honest, this was scary. I didn't want to go back to a place like that. I spent 2 days in the capsule hotel with my change of clothes and thought about what to do next. The past 2 months of living in hotels and staying with friends have been tough, but then I remembered that I have a drinking buddy who is very sensitive to spirits. He hates being sensitive to spirits because when he takes pictures, they turn out to be very spiritual. He turned me down the first time, but I promised to treat him to some high-class yakiniku. I gave off a pretty unpleasant vibe and said, "If you can do something about this building and solve it, I'll treat you again." Of course, I can only see and feel, so I'm not really a professional. I want you to do something about that. It's because you showed sympathy to that woman. I don't want you to clasp your hands together or say anything. That's why she's being so dependent on me. You got what you deserve. You better get out of here quickly. She'll follow you to your new house, or you'll be a self-destruct, so it's not okay. And you're not that popular with women. I had no choice but to go back to my parents' house with only the bare minimum of belongings. The 2-hour commute was tough, but it was better than being visited by a ghost. After that, when the new house was completed, I went back home to move, but nothing happened, and nothing spiritual has happened to me up to this day. Fortune telling. This is an experience I had when I was a freshman in high school. On the day of my high school entrance exam, I had a high fever of over 40 degrees, so I couldn't take the public high school exam, and ended up going to a municipal high school with the recommendation of my cram school teacher. There I met someone who I would call my lifelong mentor. This teacher was in charge of English in our class and was also the homeroom teacher for the class next door. She was a model working woman, always wearing makeup and a refined suit. She was a cheerful and humble person who would scold students for forgetting their homework, but she also recognized and praised the efforts of her students. Thanks to her, I came to like English very much and wanted to work in a job that used English. Under the guidance of this strict but loving teacher, I was able to enjoy my high school life. I joined a club, made many friends, and enjoyed my high school life. One day, the school festival season arrived at our school. Our high school puts a lot of effort into the school festival, and all the classes competed to see who could put on the best event for the festival, and the winning class received a special bonus. Naturally, my class and my teacher's class were fired up to win. To attract more female customers and couples, our class decided to open a fortune-telling cafe. If you ordered a drink or a dessert, you would always get a fortune-telling session. That was the content. The fortune tellers and the waitresses were divided into morning and afternoon shifts and enjoyed the cultural festival in turns. I was the tarot fortune teller and had the afternoon shift. So I thoroughly enjoyed the cultural festival in the morning, and in the afternoon, I returned to the class shop to tell fortunes. Then, that English teacher appeared with my homeroom teacher. They asked me to tell their fortunes. Since I was at work, I readily accepted their request. The homeroom teacher asked about their love fortunes, and the English teacher asked about the love fortunes of others for the year. After finishing reading the English teacher's fortune, as I was trying to read my own fortune, one of the cards I was shuffling collided with another and fell to the floor. It was the Grim Reaper. It was such an ominous card for telling death. I hurriedly shuffled the cards and immediately began to arrange them on the table. Then when I turned over the first one, my hands holding the Grim Reaper card started to tremble and became cold with sweat. Was this a coincidence? Could the same card really be drawn twice in a row? There is a probability, but at the time I had a bad feeling that it wasn't a coincidence. I'm sorry, teacher. Above all, the feeling that I made my beloved teacher feel bad weighed heavily on my heart. But it was okay. The teacher smiled calmly as always and forgave me. I'm sorry. Thank you. I was touched by the teacher's kind smile. But a few days later, the teacher's behavior started to become strange. Her once cheerful expression was showing signs of fatigue. Her cheeks were gradually getting thinner. She often yelled at students during class, and she became more and more unstable with each passing day. Her behavior was completely different from before, and we felt uneasy. We wondered if something had happened to her. Then, one day, she stopped coming to school altogether. The homeroom teacher of the class next door had also been replaced by another teacher. At first, we were all confused by this sudden turn of events, and various rumors were flying around the class. But these were gradually swept away by the flow of daily life and were forgotten from our memories. Sadly, I had also forgotten about the teacher whom I had loved so much. Then, a few months later, that day came suddenly. The teacher's death was an accident. The teacher had terminal cancer. However, she always smiled and guided us despite the pain. Of course, I was planning to go to the funeral. The day before the teacher's funeral, I was staying at the house of a friend who was a class representative for the teacher's class because my house was far away. I was spending the night with my friend, reminiscing about the teacher as I was sleeping in the room with my friend. We heard a sound like something hitting the window. What was it? It was small, but very clear. That sound woke my friend and me up, and we looked around the room, rubbing our sleepy heads. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder and clearer than before. What was that sound? A cat? Knock, knock, knock. What? It definitely wasn't a cat. I was scared. Soon the sound of something hitting the window would come back. The sounds gradually got louder and louder. Knock, 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 knock. Something's definitely wrong. Call my mum and dad. My friend was frightened and ran to the door, but why didn't it open? It was as if the door had been plastered with concrete. Not even Victor could move. We both pulled on the knob, but the knob moved with a rattle. But the door didn't move at all. We collapsed, and my friend and I suddenly realized something. What was going on? My friend and I looked up at the window and saw the teacher, with her long black hair in disarray, pale face, purple lips, and bloodshot eyes, stuck to the window and looking at us. The teacher stared at me and my friend, and when our eyes met, she laughed and seemed to be saying something with her pale lips. I couldn't see what she was saying because we were looking through a window, but I knew it was something ominous. When my friend's eyes met the teacher's, he kept saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." It seemed that my friend and I were so scared that we both collapsed without even realizing it. The next day, when I was laying flowers on the teacher's body at the funeral, it was the first time I had seen the teacher's body since I had left English classes. Although her eyes were not wide open, she looked just like the teacher I had seen the day before. It really was the teacher. But when I saw her, I was somehow convinced. And as soon as my friend saw the teacher, she suddenly fell to her knees and, just like Sakuya, kept repeating, "I'm sorry." I thought maybe she had a fight with the teacher or something, and then I left her. 3 days later, my friend hanged herself in the classroom. Her diary was also found, and it had the names of countries written on it, which showed that my friend had used her position as a class member to repeatedly harass the teacher in a very vicious way. One of the harassments was leading classmates to do the same. Some of them were quite malicious, and immediately after it was discovered in the medical records, it became a big issue at school for a while. And staff meetings and interviews were held, and students involved were called in for questioning. It seems that some students from that family were forced to retire or expel. I was called in for questioning because I was close to my friend, but I was released soon after it was discovered that I had nothing to do with it. At that time, I told my homeroom teacher about what had happened to my friend and me that night, and the homeroom teacher said that the teacher was in the final stages of her illness and had been told to marry for quite some time, but she said that she would fight the illness to the end until her students graduated. However, that harassment made the teacher fight the illness. Perhaps the feeling of being betrayed by a student she cherished made her lose the will to fight her illness. If nothing had happened, the teacher might have been able to watch your graduation ceremony. He said this with tears in his eyes, and I remembered the teacher's appearance that night. I don't want to think about it, but that night, betrayed by her beloved student, she was in despair and hurt, and the words she tried to tell her friend were, "You're all in this together." The smile on the teacher's face was surely overflowing with the joy of having been able to carry out her revenge. That's what I thought. But even so, I still visit my teacher's grave. No matter how she felt, how she met her end, or what she looked like, she was still my teacher. So, good evening, everyone. This is Coma Dango. This time, I've read 3 scary stories to you. The first one was about how you should never enter that village. I've been saying this for a while, but the rules and customs of this village are fascinating. When I read stories like that, it really gets me excited. It's like I'm looking at a world I don't know anything about, but it makes me wonder what would have happened if the old woman hadn't been there. I've wondered who she was. I think I read about the mosquito bug a long time ago. In Nube, what was it called? There was a story in Nube about a girl who took a mosquito-like thing out of her hand, and when she cut it off, the baby stopped crying. But that was just a story from the world of manga, so I was really intrigued to hear that something like that actually happened in the real world. Since I was a child, I've loved those kinds of ghost stories, so I remember Nube being a big fan. I read it. Yes, that manga is really interesting, isn't it? Really. The story that stuck in my memory the most was about a kid who committed a theft, and a sword that was enshrined in what was supposed to be a shrine or something turned into a monster and appeared and started slashing at him. That story really stuck in my mind. The design was really scary. The Gashime no Kai that appears in Nube's Noob has a lot of really scary stories, and the pictures are really scary too. I used to read Nube a lot when I was in elementary school, and it was really scary. But then I met an auntie from a relative, and she gave me pocket money. So the lady in the house went to the bookstore and bought Nube. Yes, it was scary, but it was really intriguing. Other than that story, I guess it was a story where a science teacher or something appeared and said ghosts don't exist, or something about ectoplasm, and they had a showdown with Nuba, and in the end they cooperated and defeated the enemy, or something like that. And when I think about it, my love of ghost stories really started when I read the novels that my older brother lent me, and also manga like that, when I was in elementary school, and I think that's when I really got into it. And then there was the TV program Unbelievable, which was a special feature on terrifying supernatural events, and at the root of me are these three things: manga, novels, and TV programs. And I think that the triangle, I guess you could say I'm still influenced by it, and Hanako from Ponkiki's. Yeah, it turned into a square. Not a triangle, but four. I used to watch it a lot as a child. Yeah, well, that's enough about myself. But going back to the topic at hand, I don't think I've ever been on the Kitakanto Expressway. I think it was something like a highway connecting Ibaraki to Gonma. I haven't been on it at all. I live in Kanto too. But when I say Kanto, I mean Kanagawa, so it's not in the upper part. Yeah, but as I said at the beginning, stories about villages like that are really, I think there are parts that are interesting and fascinating, so I read it with sparkling eyes. Yes, the second story was about a person who gets lonely easily. I seem to remember reading a story similar to this one before, and in that story, the author moves. But in the meantime, while she is looking for a property to rent, she is introduced to an apartment building that is also in the process of being vacated, and lives there for a few months, or so I think. But in that story, there was something about a woman patrolling the hallways of the apartment building, wearing a bright red dress and red high heels, I think. There are quite a lot of different situations in this story, don't you think? So then, didn't the author and the reviewer live in the same apartment building? But in this story, she wasn't wearing all red, so maybe it was a different place. Does this kind of thing happen a lot? Well, what I found sad was that the woman committed suicide because of his affair. I may have mentioned this before, but when I was a student, there was a woman that I dated for 4 years, and she cheated on me a lot. And we each chipped in and bought ourselves something like a pair of rings. And in the third year, my ex-girlfriend started taking them off. So I was a little worried about why she was taking them off. So I asked her about it, and she said, well, it was a bit like, in that class, she didn't want to get it dirty, and since she was a science student, they had experiments every week, and she took it off because she didn't want it to get wet with chemicals. And I thought, if that's the case, she should have just taken it off before class, but it seemed a bit suspicious, and I thought it's no good not to believe. So I left it as it was, and then someone from the same club said to me that she was walking around the station with a guy she didn't know at all, and they looked like they knew each other, and it became a serious conversation. So when I asked her directly, she confessed, and it seems that she'd been wearing it for about 3 years. So that's what we were talking about, and when I called, the guy who had cheated on her was sitting next to me. And then this guy suddenly changed his phone and said something like, I'm your boyfriend, so maybe you started dating sooner, but I'm your real boyfriend. And he said some things I didn't understand, and then he hung up the phone, and when I called again, the call didn't go through, and I couldn't get in touch with him after that, so it was the worst possible ending. And at that time I was really hurt, because we had been talking about things like, let's get married after we graduate, and stuff like that. So I didn't know what was going on, and I was really depressed, and it was really tough. I seriously thought about killing myself, and I've had that experience myself, so I really do understand how someone who has been cheated on feels. I totally get it. So it's not like I can't understand why this woman ended up taking her own life in the end. But if you take a step back, well, even if bad things happen, good things are always waiting for you. So I think that's a shame. And I think that the parents who gave birth to her, the friends around her, the family, and all those kinds of people would be incredibly sad. So in the end, I quit. But, well, he's gone now, so I can't really say anything. But reading this story brought back memories of when I was young, and I want to remember those times. Well, I don't know if I should laugh or not, but for me, it's a thing of the past. But for this woman, it must have been really hard for her. I was almost in tears, and then at the end, we talked about fortune telling. Well, fortune telling. I went to a fortune teller in Hachioji about 10 years ago, and this is continuing on from what I was saying earlier. After my partner cheated on me and we broke up, I thought maybe it was all over, and I wasn't going to die, so I went to a fortune teller. I wanted to know what the future had in store for me. I was kind of desperate, like I was clinging to it, and she said, "This year you will meet a really wonderful person, a wonderful woman." And I'm like, "Is that really true?" And so I said to her, "You will probably get married then." And I'm like, "Are you serious?" And that's what happened this year. That was exactly this year. But so far I haven't met anyone. And it doesn't look like I'm going to get married or anything like that. Well, fortune telling is sometimes accurate and sometimes not. But hearing those stories of hope at the time gave me the energy to live. So I'm really grateful for the fortune telling. We talked about a lot of other things too, but it wasn't really a fortune telling. It felt more like I was receiving a psychological counseling session. Now that I think about it, well, I haven't said that at all recently. Going to fortune telling is fun. It depends on the person. There are all kinds of styles of fortune telling, like jingling sticks or rolling dice or crystals. I think those kind of things are fun to look at, but recently I haven't had a chance to go. No, that's how it is now. No, I'm sorry that I've only been talking about myself this time. I really enjoyed reading all the stories this time. Thank you for reading.